Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The pink envelope. Imagine you're holding a wedding invitation so beautiful it hurts. That was me, 3 years ago, sitting on our worn-out IKEA couch in Austin, Texas, with a stack of creamy white envelopes spread across my lap like fragile little secrets. My then-fiancé, David, had just handed me the final list of names for our wedding. "Did I miss anyone?" he asked, kissing my forehead. I scanned the list. Mom, Dad, his brother, my sister, college roommates, co-workers. Then I saw it, a name I'd never heard before, written in his own messy handwriting, right between Aunt Linda and Uncle Joe, Sarah Martinez, and next to it, in parentheses, he'd written, ex-girlfriend. I swear, my heart didn't just skip a beat. It stopped, rewound, and then slammed into my ribs like a confused bird hitting a glass door. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. You know the feeling when your brain is screaming so loud that your vocal cords just give up? That was me. I pointed at the name. David looked at my finger, then at my face and smiled. "Oh, Sarah. Yeah, we dated for 2 years in college. She's cool. I thought we should invite her." He said it like he was suggesting we add extra chairs for the buffet. Cool. Where I come from, you don't invite an ex to a wedding. You don't even say their name in the same house where you keep your wedding photos. In my culture, exes are ghosts you bury so deep that you forget they ever existed. My Vietnamese grandmother would have fainted. Then she would have woken up, fainted again, and probably thrown a slipper at David's head. But David is American, born and raised in Ohio, moved to Texas for work, thinks drama is something that only happens on reality TV. So he looked at me like I was the weird one. "What's the big deal?" he asked. And that, my friend, was the moment I realized I wasn't just learning how to get married. I was learning how to survive a whole different planet of emotions, culture, and, yes, the English language. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. When you move to a new country and fall in love with someone from that country, you don't just learn their words, you learn their unspoken rules, their invisible lines, their version of what's normal and what's crazy. And right then, staring at that pink envelope I have to address to Sarah Martinez, I felt like the dumbest English learner in the world. I had passed the TOEFL. I could order coffee, argue with a plumber, and even understand most of the jokes on The Office. But this was a vocabulary word I'd never studied. Friendliness with an ex. Was that even a real thing? Or was my husband-to-be hiding a secret? My brain started doing what brains do best: catastrophizing. I pictured Sarah arriving at the wedding in a long white dress. I pictured her crying during our vows. I pictured David looking at her and suddenly remembering some inside joke from college, laughing in a way he never laughs with me. My chest got tight. My hands got cold, and David, sweet oblivious David, just said, "Hey, you want pizza for dinner?" That's the difference. Right there. My anxiety was a fire alarm blasting at full volume. His was a quiet hum he didn't even notice. So I did something that, looking back, was either very brave or very stupid. I didn't scream. I didn't cancel the wedding. I said, "Okay, tell me about her." And for the next hour, David talked. He told me how he met Sarah in a chemistry lab, how she taught him to like sushi, how they broke up because she got a job in New York and he wanted to stay in Texas. No cheating, no fighting, just two people who realized they weren't each other's forever. "We text sometimes," he said, like, "Happy birthday," or when her cat died, that's it. I listened, and slowly, my fire alarm turned into a flickering candle. But it was still there, because here's the secret your English textbook will never teach you. The hardest words to understand aren't vocabulary, they're feelings. You can know the word jealousy perfectly. You can spell it, say it, write it in a sentence. But when jealousy actually punches you in the gut while you're holding a wedding invitation, that's a whole different lesson. And that lesson doesn't come from a classroom. It comes from sitting on a couch in Texas, staring at the name of a woman you've never met, while the man you love hums a song and waits for you to say something. So I took a breath, a long, shaky, this dash is dash ridiculous dash but dash I single quotes am dash doing dash it dash anyway breath. And I said, okay, invite her. David's face lit up. Really? That's great. She'd be happy for us. He hugged me. I hugged him back. But in my head, I was already writing a different story. A dark, dramatic movie where Sarah showed up in a black veil and cursed our marriage. I was scared. I was confused. And I was also, for the first time in months, completely fascinated. Because this wasn't just a wedding. This was a real-life experiment, a question I had to answer for myself. Can two women who loved the same man ever really sit in the same room without bleeding? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. And somewhere in that mess of fear and curiosity, I accidentally discovered the most powerful way to learn English. Not with flashcards, not with grammar drills, but with a story so uncomfortable, so personal, so terrifyingly real, that my brain had no choice but to pay attention. That's what this video is really about. Not just my wedding, not just an ex-girlfriend, but the strange, beautiful truth that you become fluent in any language when you stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be alive. So stay with me, because that pink envelope was only the beginning. And what happened next? Let's just say I learned a few things about Americans, exes, and myself that no dictionary could ever teach me. A cultural earthquake. Here's the thing about growing up in a Vietnamese household. You learn very early that certain topics are not just forbidden. They're radioactive. You don't talk about money problems in front of guests. You don't criticize your parents' cooking, even if the fish sauce smells like a battlefield. And you absolutely, under no circumstances, mention your ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend after you've gotten engaged. In my mother's world, exes are like ghosts in a horror movie. The moment you acknowledge they exist, they gain power. They can float through walls, knock over your ancestors' altar, and ruin your entire future. So, when I called my mum the night David, and I decided to invite Sarah, I already knew what was coming. NDI, I said, my voice trembling like a kid caught stealing candy. David wants to invite his old girlfriend to the wedding. There was a long, terrible silence on the other end. The kind of silence that isn't empty. It's packed with disappointment, confusion, and the faint sound of my mother's soul leaving her body. Then she spoke. Convene. Are you crazy? That was the polite version. What followed was a 10-minute lecture in rapid-fire Vietnamese about honor, respect, and the sacredness of marriage. She told me that in our culture, inviting an ex is like inviting a curse. She asked if David had lost his mind. She wondered out loud if Americans were raised by wolves. And the whole time, I couldn't really argue with her, because a part of me agreed. I had spent 26 years absorbing the unspoken rule. The past stays in the past. You don't stir old soup. But here's the problem. I wasn't in Vietnam anymore. I was in America. And in America, the rules were different. Not wrong, necessarily. Just upside down. Let me explain what I mean by a cultural earthquake. Imagine you've spent your whole life believing that the ground is solid and permanent. Then one day, someone hands you a map that shows the ground is actually made of floating plates that crash into each other all the time. That's how I felt. Every instinct in my body was screaming danger, jealousy, fight or flight. But David's friends, his American friends, kept saying things like, "Oh, Sarah, yeah, she's great. We still see her at parties sometimes." Or, "My ex came to my wedding. It was totally fine." One of his coworkers actually said, I went camping with my ex and her new husband last summer. We had a blast. A blast? You went camping with the woman who used to kiss your husband and you had a blast. My brain short-circuited. I started doing what any rational, terrified person would do. Research. I went down an internet rabbit hole at 2 in the morning, typing questions into Google like a detective trying to solve a murder. Can American exes be friends? Why do Americans stay friends with people they dated? Is it normal to invite an ex to a wedding in the US? And the answers shock me. According to psychology studies I've found, about 60% of Americans have remained friends with at least one ex. 60%. That's not a weird exception. That's a cultural norm. But why? The more I read, the more I understood. American culture, especially compared to my own, places a huge value on what psychologists call amicable separation. In other words, breaking up without burning the house down. In Vietnam, when a relationship ends, it's often seen as a failure or a betrayal. Families get involved, villages take sides. You don't just lose a boyfriend, you lose face. But in America, relationships end all the time, and nobody calls the village elders. People move on, but they don't always move away. They just shift. A romantic partner becomes a friend. A lover becomes a familiar stranger. And somehow, that's supposed to be healthy. I read about attachment theory, about how secure people can transition from romantic love to platonic love without trauma. I read about co-parenting and shared friend groups and all the modern reasons why keeping an ex around might actually be a sign of emotional maturity. And intellectually, I got it. I really did. But emotionally, my gut was still doing backflips. Because here's the secret about cultural earthquakes. They don't just shake your beliefs, they shake your identity. When you grow up in one culture and then fall in love with someone from another, you constantly have to ask yourself, am I wrong, or are they wrong, or is nobody wrong? And we're just speaking different emotional languages. That question haunted me for weeks. Every time David mentioned Sarah, I felt a little stab of something I couldn't name. Not pure jealousy, not pure anger, something more complicated, a kind of homesickness for a world where the rules were simple, where exes were enemies and weddings were sacred ground. But I wasn't in that world anymore. I was in Austin, Texas, wearing jeans and eating breakfast tacos, planning a wedding with a man who thought drama was a Netflix genre, not a family obligation, and slowly, painfully, I realized something important. If I wanted to understand David, truly understand him, I had to stop judging his culture through my culture's glasses. I had to learn a new emotional vocabulary. In Vietnamese, we have a word, dien, which means a kind of fate or karmic connection between people. It's beautiful, but it's also heavy. Once you have dien with someone, you're supposed to either marry them or leave them forever. There's no in-between. But English doesn't have that word. English has phrases like we're still cool or we're on good terms, light phrases, airy phrases, phrases that float instead of sink. That's when it hit me. The difference wasn't just about exes. It was about how two cultures handle emotional weight. My culture piles it on. American culture tries to distribute it evenly, like spreading butter on toast. Neither way is perfect, but if I was going to marry an American, I had to learn to spread a little butter. So I made a deal with myself. I would attend my own wedding. I would look Sarah Martinez in the eye, and I would not faint, cry, or throw a shoe. Instead, I would watch. I would listen. I would learn, because that's what English learners do when they're brave. They don't hide from the confusing words. They lean into them. They let the confusion teach them something new. And let me tell you, the confusion was just getting started, because the wedding day was still 3 months away. And Sarah, she hadn't even RSVP'd yet. The silent scream. Let me tell you about the 3 worst weeks of my engagement. They weren't bad because David and I fought. They weren't bad because the wedding planning fell apart. They were bad because of what happened inside my own head every single night around 2 in the morning. You know that time, right? When the house is quiet, your partner is breathing softly next to you, and your brain decides to host its own horror movie marathon. No ticket required, no pause button. Just scene after scene of your deepest fears playing on the inside of your eyelids. That was me, lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, while my mind replayed every possible disaster with Sarah. What if she's prettier than me? What if she and David share a secret language of inside jokes that I'll never understand? What if everyone at the wedding looks at her and thinks, "Oh, that's the one who got away"? These thoughts weren't quiet whispers. They were loud, screaming, irrational monsters. And the more I tried to push them away, the louder they got. That, my friend, is what I call the silent scream. It's the noise your brain makes when you're terrified but you can't show it, when you're supposed to be happy, engaged, in love, planning a future. But instead you're drowning in comparison and jealousy and shame for even feeling jealous in the first place. And here's the part that connects to you, the English learner. Because the silent scream isn't just about weddings or ex-girlfriends. It's about every moment in your life when you try to learn something new and your own brain becomes your worst enemy. Think about it. When was the last time you tried to speak English and felt that familiar panic? Your mouth opens. You know the word somewhere in your memory, but suddenly you're comparing yourself to a native speaker. You're imagining everyone judging your accent. You're replaying that time you said beach instead of bitch and wanted to disappear into the floor. That's the silent scream. It's the voice in your head that says, "You'll never be good enough. You'll always sound stupid. Why are you even trying?" And the worst part, the more you try to silence it, the stronger it becomes. I learned this the hard way. Every night, I would tell myself, "Stop thinking about Sarah. She's just a person. David chose you." And every night, my brain would answer, "But what if he didn't really choose you? What if she's the one he should have married?" This is not just insecurity. This is a biological process happening inside your skull, and understanding it might be the most useful thing you ever do for your English learning. So let me put on my amateur neuroscientist hat for a minute. Don't worry, I'll keep it fun. Your brain has a built-in alarm system called the amygdala. Think of it as a very anxious, slightly paranoid security guard whose only job is to scan for threats. When you face something unfamiliar, like your fiancé inviting his ex to your wedding, or you trying to pronounce a difficult English word in front of strangers, the amygdala doesn't wait to gather evidence. It just screams, "Danger, shut down." Hi. This alarm system evolved millions of years ago to protect you from tigers and enemy tribes. But here's the problem. Your amygdala can't tell the difference between a tiger and an awkward social situation. It can't tell the difference between a real threat and a memory of embarrassment from 3rd grade. So, when you feel that spike of fear before speaking English, that's not weakness. That's your ancient survival brain doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. The trouble starts when you believe the alarm, when you hear danger and you run away. Because every time you avoid speaking English, every time you let the silent scream win, you teach your brain one thing. Avoidance works, and your brain loves things that work. So it cranks up the volume on your fear. Next time, the scream gets louder. Next time, you feel even more stuck. That's the trap I was falling into with Sarah. Every night I lay in bed imagining worst-case scenarios. I was training my brain to see her as a monster. I was making my fear bigger, stronger, and more real, without a single piece of evidence. Psychologists call this catastrophizing. I call it building a prison in your own mind, and then complaining about the bars. But here's the good news. The same brain that creates the silent scream can also learn to turn down the volume. The trick is not to fight the scream. Fighting it makes it louder. The trick is to do something counterintuitive. You lean into it. You get curious, you ask yourself, okay, fear, what are you actually trying to protect me from? When I finally stopped fighting my jealousy and started examining it, I discovered something surprising. I wasn't really afraid of Sarah. I was afraid of not being enough. I was afraid that deep down, I didn't deserve this happy ending. I was afraid that my English, my culture, my awkwardness made me less valuable than a woman who grew up here, who shared David's childhood references, who never had to ask what horseradish meant. And that realization was painful, but it was also freeing. Because once you name the real fear, it loses some of its power. It goes from a faceless monster to a specific problem, and specific problems have specific solutions. For me, the solution wasn't to uninvite Sarah. It was to work on my own sense of worth. For you, the solution to the silent scream about English might not be to memorize more vocabulary. It might be to accept that you will make mistakes. It might be to realize that native speakers don't judge you nearly as much as you judge yourself. I remember reading a study that said people consistently overestimate how much others notice their flaws. We think we're walking around with a spotlight on our foreheads, but really, everyone else is too busy worrying about their own spotlight to pay much attention to yours. That's not just psychology. That's permission. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to sound silly. Permission to invite the ex to the wedding and see what actually happens instead of what your nightmares predict. So here's what I did. I stopped lying awake at 2 in the morning. I started writing down my fears on a piece of paper. Not to solve them, just to look at them. I'm afraid Sarah will be prettier. Okay. Then what? Then David might wish he married her. But David proposed to me. He didn't call her, he called my father. I'm afraid everyone will compare us. But whose voice is saying that? Not David's. Not any real person's, just mine. Slowly, like for burning off a morning road, the fear began to lift. It didn't disappear completely, but it shrank enough for me to see the truth. The silent scream is just noise. It's not a command. You don't have to obey it. You can hear it, acknowledge it, and then do the brave thing anyway. David invited Sarah. I agreed. And the wedding day kept creeping closer. What happened when we finally met face to face? What did she actually say to me? And how did that awkward moment become the best English lesson I never asked for stay with me? Because the scream was about to meet its match. Her name is Sarah. Here's the thing about monsters, they're always scariest in the dark, but the moment you turn on the light, shine it right in their face, they usually turn out to be just people. Regular, flawed, unremarkable people who eat cereal for dinner and have bad hair days like everyone else. That's what I discovered when I finally stopped spiraling and actually asked David the real questions. Not the jealous, screaming questions like, do you still love her? But the quiet, curious ones. The ones that sound like a journalist, not a prosecutor. Tell me about the first time you met her. What did you fight about? Why did you really break up? And to his credit, David didn't get defensive. He didn't hide or lie or make things weird. He just talked. And the more he talked, the more the monster in my head started to shrink. He told me he met Sarah in a chemistry lab during his junior year at the University of Texas. She was pre-med, brilliant, the kind of person who corrected the professor's mistakes quietly, without showing off. They bonded over bad coffee and organic chemistry, which David described as a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. They started dating slowly, no fireworks, no dramatic movie moments, just two people who enjoyed each other's company and figured, why not? For 2 years they were that couple. The one everyone assumed would get married because they made sense on paper. Same career ambitions, same friend group, same weird love for hiking trails that took 6 hours and offered no bathroom facilities. But here's what David said that really stuck with me. We never fought about big things. We just faded. Like a song that plays too many times. You don't hate it, you just stop hearing it. The breakup wasn't a blur. There was no cheating, no betrayal, no dramatic doorstep confrontation in the rain. Sarah got a fellowship in New York. David wanted to stay in Texas for his job. They talked about long distance for about 2 hours. Realized neither of them wanted it enough to actually try. And that was that. They hugged at the airport. She cried a little. He felt sad for a wee. And then life moved on. That's the story. That's the big, terrifying secret I'd been losing sleep over. No hidden passion. No unfinished business. Just two people who were right for each other at 22 and wrong for each other at 24. It was so ordinary. So disappointingly normal. And yet, my brain had turned it into a thriller novel. I felt almost embarrassed. All those nights of catastrophic thinking. All those imaginary scenes of Sarah gliding into my wedding like a ghost from a telenovela. And for what? So I could find out she was just a pre-med student who once cried over a spilled beaker of hydrochloric acid. But here's the deeper lesson. And this is where it connects to you and your English learning journey. Our brains are wired to fill in gaps with fear when we don't know something. When there's an empty space in a story. Our imagination doesn't leave it empty. It rushes in with the worst possible version. Psychologists call this negative bias. It's an evolutionary holdover from the days when assuming the rustle in the bushes was a tiger kept you alive, assuming it was just the wind got you eaten. So your brain defaults to danger. It assumes the ex-girlfriend is a threat. It assumes the native speaker is judging your accent. It assumes the email from your boss is bad news. But here's what I learned. The cure for negative bias is not positive thinking. Positive thinking is just slapping a bandage on a wound that needs stitches. The real cure is information. Specific. Concrete. Boring information. You want to stop being afraid of the ex. Ask about her. Find out she has allergies and hates cilantro. Find out she once failed a driving test. Find out she's just a person. You want to stop being afraid of speaking English. Get specific about what you're actually afraid of. Are you afraid people will laugh? Has anyone actually laughed? Or is that just a story you're telling yourself? Are you afraid you'll sound stupid? Who gets to define stupid? Is it the person trying, or the person hiding? I started asking David for more details about Sarah. Not because I was obsessing, but because I was hunting for the ordinary. What does she do for fun? She knits really badly. She tried to make me a scarf once and it looked like a mutated snake. What's her biggest fear? Spiders. She once climbed onto a table at a party and refused to come down for 20 minutes. Little by little, Sarah transformed from a villain in my mind into a slightly awkward, spider-fearing bad knitter who happened to date my fiancé 6 years ago. And you know what? I started to feel something unexpected. Not friendship yet, not even comfort, but relief. The kind of relief you feel when you realize the scary noise at night was just the refrigerator humming. The monster wasn't real. I had built it myself, brick by brick, with nothing but my own insecurity and a lack of information. This is why, in your English learning, I want you to become a collector of ordinary details. Don't just study grammar rules. Study real conversations. Listen to how Americans fumble their words, say and like. Forget the right vocabulary. Listen to how we stumble through small talk and apologize for interrupting and laugh at our own mistakes. Because the more ordinary details you collect, the less intimidating the language becomes. You realize that native speakers aren't perfect either. We misuse words, we forget names. We say could have instead of could have and don't even notice. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not a chasm. It's just a series of small, boring, human moments. And you can cross that gap one ordinary step at a time. By the time David finished telling me about Sarah, I had a full picture. She was a decent person who once loved him and then stopped. She didn't want him back. She had a new boyfriend in New York. An anesthesiologist named Mark who, according to David, looks like a slightly more handsome version of me, which is annoying. She wasn't coming to my wedding to steal my groom. She was coming to eat free cake, drink cheap champagne, and catch up with old friends, just like every other guest. I remember sitting on the couch after that conversation, looking at David, and feeling something shift in my chest. The jealousy didn't vanish completely, but it turned into something quieter, something manageable, a small, distant hum instead of a screaming alarm. And that's when I realized the biggest truth of all: learning to live with an unfamiliar culture or an unfamiliar language isn't about eliminating fear. It's about gathering enough information that the fear becomes background noise. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be curious. So I decided to do something that terrified me. I asked David if I could message Sarah directly, not to fight, not to interrogate, just to say, "Hi, I'm the woman marrying your ex. I've heard nice things. See you at the wedding." David blinked. "You want to text my ex-girlfriend?" "Yes," I said. "I want to meet the monster." He laughed and handed me his phone. And that text, it changed everything. The wedding day arrives. 3 months passed like a slow river, and then suddenly, the day was here. Not the abstract, distant wedding day I had been catastrophizing about in the dark. The actual, real, no more time to prepare wedding day. I remember waking up at 6 in the morning, the Texas sun already aggressive and golden, and feeling my stomach do a flip so violent I thought I might skip breakfast entirely. But here's what surprised me. The first thought in my head wasn't about Sarah. It was about my mother's tears, my dress, the flowers, the 15 different things that could go wrong with the caterer. Sarah was there. Yes, lurking in the back of my mind like a spider in a corner. But she wasn't the monster anymore. She was just a guest. A guest I actually texted with a few times since that brave, stupid night when I asked David for her number. And those texts, they had been weirdly pleasant. I had written, "Hi Sarah, it's David's fiancé. Just wanted to say I'm looking forward to meeting you at the wedding. He's told me nice things." And she had written back within an hour, "Hi, he's told me nice things about you too. Can't wait to celebrate with you both. Also, please tell him I still have that ugly scarf he gave me in 2018. It's my cleaning rag now." A cleaning rag. She called his gift a cleaning rag. And she used a smiling emoji. That single message did more to calm my nervous system than any amount of self-help podcasting ever could. Because here was proof. Actual, written, emoji-filled proof. That Sarah wasn't a threat. She was a woman with a sense of humor. A woman who had moved on so completely as she could turn an old boyfriend's gift into a joke about household chores. The monster had texted me a smiley face. And just like that, the last remaining bricks of my imaginary prison crumbled to dust. But let me be honest with you. Knowing something in your head and feeling it in your chest are two very different things. So on the morning of the wedding, even though I had exchanged friendly messages with Sarah, even though I had logically accepted that she wasn't a danger, my hands still shook when I put on my earrings. My sister noticed. "You okay?" she asked, zipping up the back of my dress. "I'm fine," I said, which is what people always say when they are absolutely not fine. The venue was a small garden outside Austin, the kind of place with string lights and wildflowers and wooden benches that creaked when you sat on them. We had invited about 80 people, a mix of David's American family and friends and my Vietnamese relatives, who had flown in wearing their finest or dye, and looking deeply confused by the idea of an outdoor wedding in October. But what if it rains? My aunt had asked 17 times. It doesn't rain in October, David had assured her. It rained for exactly 12 minutes during the rehearsal dinner. My aunt still hasn't let him forget it. I was hiding in the bridal suite, a converted farmhouse with creaky floors and a mirror that made everyone look slightly green, when David's best man knocked on the door. "Guests are arriving," he said. "Sarah's here." Those two words, Sarah's here, they landed in my chest like two stones dropped into still water. Ripples of something. Not fear. Not jealousy, just awareness. Spread through my body. I took a breath, the long, shaky kind I had been practicing for 3 months. And then I did something I'm still proud of. I didn't ask for a description. I didn't peek through the window. I didn't send my sister on a reconnaissance mission. I just said, okay, thanks. And I went back to looking at my own reflection, because I had made a decision weeks ago. Sitting on that couch after texting Sarah about her cleaning rag, I had decided that my wedding day would not be about her. It would be about me and David, about the life we were building, about the fact that he chose me, not because I was better than Sarah or worse than Sarah, but because I was me, and that was enough. The ceremony started at 4 o'clock. The sky had cleared after the morning rain, and the garden smelled like wet earth and honeysuckle. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. My eyes locked on David, who was already crying. Big, embarrassing, beautiful tears that made half the guests cry too. I didn't look left. I didn't look right. I just walked toward the man I loved. And for those 30 seconds, there was no Sarah, no jealousy, no cultural earthquake. There was only us. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. The officiant, a friend of David's who had gotten ordained online, said, I now pronounce you wife and husband. And I kissed David like we were the only two people on earth. Then came the reception, the music, the toasts, the terrible chicken dance that David's uncle insisted on starting. And somewhere between the salad course and the champagne toast, I finally saw her. Sarah was sitting at a table near the back, next to a man I assumed was Mark, the anesthesiologist. She was wearing a navy blue dress, nothing flashy, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was laughing at something Mark had said, her head tilted back, her shoulders relaxed. She looked normal, happy, completely uninterested in my husband. And that's when I felt it. Not a thunderbolt of friendship, not a sudden rush of love, just a quiet, steady sense of okayness. The world hadn't ended. The wedding hadn't been ruined. I was still married, still standing, still wearing a dress with a small wine stain on a hem from when David's nephew bumped into me. Everything was fine. More than fine. It was lovely. About an hour later, as I was cutting the cake, David smashed a piece into my nose, which is apparently an American tradition I was not consulted on. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there she was, Sarah Martinez, standing 2 feet away, holding a glass of champagne, smiling the same relaxed smile I had seen from across the room. Hi, she said. I'm Sarah. Congratulations. Her voice was warm, ordinary, not seductive or threatening, anything my imagination had cooked up. Just the voice of a woman who had once loved someone and now didn't, and who was perfectly fine with that. I opened my mouth to speak, and what came out surprised both of us. 3 minutes of discomfort. I opened my mouth to speak, and what came out surprised both of us. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. And thank you for the cleaning rag text. That really helped. Sarah laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one. And I saw something in her eyes shift. Recognition. Maybe. Or relief. The kind of look that says, oh, you're not going to make this weird. Thank God. David always did have terrible taste in gifts, she said. One year he gave me a blender for our anniversary. A blender. I laughed too, not because it was hilarious, but because my body needed to release the pressure that had been building for 3 months. And once the laughter came, it kept coming. We stood there, the new wife and the ex-girlfriend, in the middle of a wedding reception, laughing about a stupid blender while David was across the room trying to teach my grandmother how to do the electric sleigh. It was surreal. It was also I realized exactly what I had been afraid of. Not the laughter at the ease, the casual, unbothered way Sarah acted around me. Like I was just another person at a party. Not a rival in a romantic battlefield. And that ease, that American, friendly, no big deal ease, was the most uncomfortable thing I had ever felt, because my culture had trained me to expect something different. In Vietnam, an ex doesn't come to the wedding, and if she did, by some bizarre miracle, she wouldn't laugh at the bride. She would bow stiffly, avoid eye contact, and leave early. There would be tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Everyone would whisper. The aunties would exchange meaningful glances. The air would be heavy with unspoken judgment. But this was light. Almost weightless. And for someone who grew up measuring emotional distance in kilograms, weightlessness was terrifying. I remember reading once about astronauts who return from space and have trouble walking because they've forgotten what gravity feels like. That was me at my own wedding. Sarah's friendliness was zero gravity. I didn't know how to stand in it. You look beautiful, by the way, Sarah said, glancing at my dress. David showed me a picture of you when you first started dating. He was so nervous. He kept asking me if I thought you were out of his league. Wait, what? David had talked to his ex-girlfriend about me. Before we were even serious, I felt a new wave of something. Not jealousy this time. Curiosity. What did you tell him? I asked. Sarah grinned. I told him to stop being an idiot and ask you to marry him before someone else did. I stood there, cake in one hand, champagne in the other, and felt my entire understanding of this woman flip upside down. She hadn't come to my wedding as a threat. She had come as a cheerleader, an ex-girlfriend who had, apparently, been rooting for us from the sidelines. The 3 minutes that followed were the longest and shortest of my life. Long because every second was packed with new information, new emotions, new adjustments to my mental map of who Sarah was. Short because, looking back, I wish I had asked her more questions. I wish I had been braver. But here's what I did manage to say. In that awkward, beautiful, uncomfortable stretch of time, I asked her if she was happy with Mark. She said yes, very. I asked her if she ever missed David. She paused for exactly 1 second. The kind of pause that could mean anything. And then said, I miss who I was when I was with him. But that person doesn't exist anymore. And that's a good thing. That sentence hit me like a wave. I miss who I was when I was with him, not him. The version of herself that existed in that chapter of her life. That's so different from what my jealous brain had imagined. I had imagined her pining for David, missing his smell, his laugh, the way he said her name. But she wasn't missing him. She was missing her own past self. And those are two completely different heartbreaks. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to sit down with Sarah for an hour and interview her like an anthropologist studying a strange tribe. But the DJ started playing a slow song and David appeared beside me, sweaty and happy, and said, "I dance." Sarah stepped back. "Go," she said. "I'll find you later." And then she did something I will never forget. She reached out and squeezed my hand, just for a moment. Her hand was warm and dry, and the squeeze was quick, almost businesslike. But it said everything. I'm not your enemy, we're good. You can breathe now. David pulled me onto the dance floor, and as we swayed to some romantic country song I'd never heard before, I looked over his shoulder and watched Sarah return to Mark. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. They looked comfortable, boring, even, in the best possible way. Everything okay? David whispered in my ear. I thought about lying, about saying fine again. But I was tired of fine. I was tired of pretending my emotions were smaller than they were. That was weird, I admitted, but not bad weird. Just new weird. David laughed. Americans are weird, he said. We know. And for the first time all day, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel at my own wedding. Gratitude, not just for David or for the beautiful day, or for my family who had traveled so far. But for Sarah, for showing up, for being normal, for squeezing my hand, for being a real person instead of the monster I had created. Later that night, after the cake was gone and the guests had left and David was passed out in our hotel room still wearing his bow tie, I pulled out my phone. I had a new message. From Sarah. You two are perfect together. I'm so glad he found you. Welcome to the weird American family. I read the message 4 times, then I typed back. Thank you. And I'm sorry I was scared of you. Her reply came within seconds. I was scared of you too. The first time David told me about you, I thought, she's going to hate me. But you didn't. You texted me about the scarf. That took guts. I smiled in the dark. David snored beside me, and I realized that 3 minutes of discomfort had just changed the entire story I was telling myself about this country, this marriage, and this language. Because English, real English, the kind people actually speak, isn't just grammar and vocabulary. It's the words you use when you're scared and you reach out anyway. It's the text you send to your fiance's ex. It's the laugh you share about a blender. It's the hand squeeze that says more than any sentence ever could. I had been trying to learn English like a machine. Memorize, repeat, perfect. But that night, lying next to my snoring husband, I understood something new. The best way to learn a language is to live a story that matters to you. A story that scares you a little. A story that makes you reach out, even when your hands are shaking. Sarah and I didn't become best friends that night. But we became something, and that something, that small, tentative, cross-cultural bridge, was the most valuable English lesson I never knew I needed. What happened next? Did we actually become friends? Did my mother ever forgive David for the rain incident? And how did all of this lead to me speaking English more fluently than any classroom ever managed? Stick with me, because the best part of the story is still coming. Asking Americans, the wedding ended. The flowers wilted. The leftover cake sat in our freezer for 6 months until I finally threw it away, ashamed of my own sentimentality. But something else didn't end. My curiosity. Because even though Sarah had been kind, even though she had squeezed my hand and sent that sweet text, I still didn't fully understand. How could Americans be so casual about something my culture treated as sacred, or dangerous, or both? So I did what any confused immigrant with Wi-Fi and too much time on her hands would do. I started asking questions, not Google this time. Real people, real Americans. I turned my own life into a research project. Every time I met one of David's friends, or a coworker, or even the barista at our local coffee shop who always spelled my name wrong, I asked the same question. Can exes really be friends? And would you invite yours to your wedding? The answers I got were so varied, so contradictory, so wonderfully human that I almost forgot to be confused. Almost. Let me start with David's best friend, Mike. Mike is the kind of guy who wears cargo shorts in December and thinks salsa is a vegetable. I asked him about his ex-girlfriend from college, a woman named Jenna who he dated for 3 years. Oh yeah, Jenna's great, he said, not looking up from his phone. She came to my wedding. We still grab lunch sometimes. My wife thinks she's hilarious. I stared at him. Your wife is friends with your ex? Yeah, Mike said, like I had just asked if water was wet. Why wouldn't she be? I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I had too many answers, none of which Mike would understand. Because in my world, a wife being friends with her husband's ex is not a happy coincidence. It's a plot twist in a telenovela. It's the kind of thing that makes grandmothers reach for their prayer beads. But Mike wasn't lying. He wasn't hiding secret pain. He genuinely, truly, unbotheredly thought that exes and current partners could all just hang out, like it was a potluck. I asked my coworker, Lisa, who is divorced and has 2 kids. My ex-husband comes to every Thanksgiving, she said. cutting a bagel with alarming precision. He brings his new wife. She makes really good sweet potato casserole. We watch football. It's fine. It's fine. 2 words that Americans use to describe everything from a minor headache to the complete dissolution of a marriage. I asked David's mom, my new mother-in-law, a woman named Carol who has never met an emotion she couldn't stuff into a Tupperware container. "Oh, honey," she said, patting my hand. "Your father-in-law's ex-wife came to our wedding. We're still friends. She dog sits for us when we go on vacation." Wait. Pause. Rewind. Ex-wife. As in, someone my father-in-law was actually married to. And she dog sits. And this is normal. I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Except the rabbit hole was called American culture. And every new level was weirder than the last. But here's what I learned, after asking about 30 people and taking mental notes like a spy in a foreign land. The answer to can exes be friends is not yes or no. It's it depends. And what it depends on is something psychologists call boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible fences you build around your relationships. They're the rules you don't write down but everyone understands. In my Vietnamese family, the boundary around an ex is a 10-foot concrete wall with barbed wire on top. In Mike's world, the boundary is a friendly wave from across the street. Neither is wrong, but they are different. And the Americans who successfully stayed friends with their exes, they all had one thing in common. They had clear, explicit, talked about boundaries. One woman told me, "My ex and I are friends, but we never talk about our current relationships. That's the rule. If he starts complaining about his wife, I say, nope, not my business, and change the subject." Another said, "We only hang out in groups. Never alone. Never late at night. That's the boundary." A third, a man who had been divorced for a decade, said, "We text maybe twice a year, birthday and Christmas. That's it. Anything more would be weird." Noticed a pattern? These weren't people who had no boundaries. They had strict boundaries, just different ones from mine. The fear I had felt before the wedding, the silent scream that kept me awake at night, came from not knowing what the boundaries were. Would Sarah show up and act like she still owned a piece of David? Would she touch his arm, laugh too loudly at his jokes, stand a little too close? But when I actually watched them interact at the wedding, I saw the boundaries. They hugged quickly, the kind of side hug you give a coworker. They said good to see you and then immediately turned to other people. They didn't wander off together. They didn't whisper in corners. David introduced me to her with his arm around my waist. Sarah said, "She's beautiful, David. You did good." And then she walked away. That was it. That was the whole interaction. My 3 months of terror, reduced to 30 seconds of polite, boundary-filled small talk. I remember reading a study about cross-cultural relationships. The researcher found that most conflicts don't come from big things like religion or politics. They come from unspoken expectations. You expect your partner to know that exes are off-limits. He expects you to know that exes can be friends. Neither of you says anything. Then the wedding invitation goes out, and suddenly you're both confused and hurt and wondering if you married a stranger. That was us. David and I had never actually talked about boundaries. Not really. We had talked about flowers and cake and seating charts, but we hadn't talked about what friends with an ex actually looked like in practice. What texts were okay? What hangouts were okay? What do you do if the ex starts flirting? What do you do if you start feeling jealous? We had skipped all of that, and skipping it almost broke us before we even started. So after the wedding, after the guests left and the gifts were opened and the real life began, David and I had a conversation. A real one. Not a fight. A conversation. I told him about the silent scream. He told me he had no idea I was suffering. I told him that in my culture, inviting an ex is a sign of disrespect. He told me that in his culture, Not inviting an ex can be seen as petty and immature. We sat with that difference for a while. It was uncomfortable. The discomfort, I was learning, is not the same as danger. Then we made our own boundaries, together. David agreed that he would never hang out with Sarah alone without telling me first. I agreed that I would never forbid him from seeing her, because that would feel like control. He agreed to introduce me to any ex he still talked to. I agreed to assume good intentions until proven otherwise. We wrote nothing down. We didn't sign a contract. But we made a promise, and that promise, that shared understanding of where the fence was, made all the difference. Because here's the secret about boundaries that applies to English learning too. You can't learn a language without setting boundaries with yourself. Boundaries about how much time you'll spend studying. Boundaries about how you'll react when you make a mistake. Boundaries about the voice in your head that says you're not good enough. You have to decide, ahead of time, what is okay and what is not okay. Is it okay to sound stupid? Yes. Is it okay to give up? No. Is it okay to compare yourself to native speakers? No. Is it okay to feel frustrated? Yes. But only for a day, and then you get back to work. Those are your boundaries, your rules, your invisible fence. Without them, the silent scream wins. With them, you can have the ex at the wedding, eat cake, and actually enjoy yourself. I know this sounds like a lot of psychology for a language lesson, but I promise you, the psychology is the language lesson. Because English is not just words, it's relationships. It's cultures bumping into each other. It's you standing in the middle of a crowded room, holding a glass of champagne, talking to your husband's ex-girlfriend, and realizing that you're not going to die. You're just going to learn something. And what I learned from asking all those Americans, the answer to can exes be friends is yes. But only if everyone knows where the fence is. And only if you're brave enough to build it together. So what happened next with Sarah? Did we actually become friends? Or did that handshake at the wedding end up being the last time we spoke? And how did she, of all people, help me finally feel fluent in English? Stick around, the answer will surprise you. The science of letting go. You know what surprised me most about the whole Sarah situation? Not that we became friendly. Not that my jealousy faded. What surprised me was how it faded. It didn't happen because I tried really hard to be a good person. It didn't happen because David convinced me with logical arguments. It happened because my brain, the squishy 3-pound organ inside my skull, literally rewired itself. An understanding that rewiring process changed everything about how I approach fear, including the fear of speaking English. So let me put on my science hat again. But don't worry. No boring lectures, no textbooks, just the kind of weird, fascinating brain facts that make you go, huh? So I'm not broken. I'm just human. Here's the first thing you need to know. Your brain has a built-in teacher. It's called experience-dependent neuroplasticity, which is a fancy way of saying every time you do something, your brain gets better at doing it. Even the things you don't want to get better at, like worrying. Every night I lay in bed imagining Sarah stealing my husband. I was practicing worrying. I was doing mental reps. I was building a superhighway of fear in my brain, complete with exit ramps and rest stops and neon signs that said danger ahead. And because I kept traveling the highway, my brain assumed it was important. So it made the highway wider, smoother, faster. By the time the wedding arrived, my fear of Sarah was not just an emotion. It was a physical structure in my brain. A well-paved road I could drive down in seconds, without even thinking. But here's the beautiful part. The same plasticity that builds fear highways can also build courage highways. You just have to drive on the other road for a while. And that's exactly what started happening after the wedding. Every time I texted Sarah and nothing bad happened, my brain weakened the fear connection just a little. Every time I saw her interact with David, polite, distant, boundary respecting, My brain built a new connection. Sarah equals safety. Every time I remembered her hand squeeze and her smile, the old highway started to crack. Weeds grew through the asphalt. The neon signs flickered and died. This is not metaphor. This is biology. When neurons fire together, they wire together. But when they stop firing together, they stop wiring together. The fear you feel when you try to speak English, that's a highway you've been driving for years, maybe decades. Every time you opened your mouth and felt embarrassed, every time someone corrected you harshly, every time you froze in front of a cashier, those experiences built a superhighway of anxiety. Your brain isn't trying to hurt you, it's trying to protect you. It's saying, last time we did this, it hurt. Let's not do it again. But your brain doesn't know that you're not the same person you were last time. It doesn't know that you've grown, that you've practiced, that you're ready. It just knows the highway. So you have to teach it a new road. And teaching a new road requires something uncomfortable. It requires exposure. Psychologists call it exposure therapy. I call it doing the thing that scares you, or nothing bad actually happens. When I finally met Sarah at the wedding and she didn't attack me, didn't flirt with David, didn't ruin anything, my brain received new data. The bad thing didn't happen. Maybe this highway is outdated. And every subsequent interaction, the texts, the occasional coffee, the time she babysat our dog when we went on vacation, laid down more new pavement. Eventually, the old highway became a forgotten back road, overgrown, unused. Still there, technically, but no longer the route my brain automatically took. This is the science of letting go. You don't erase memories. You don't forget the fear. You just build something stronger on top of it. I remember reading a study about London cab drivers. Their brains actually grow larger in the region responsible for spatial memory, because they have to memorize thousands of streets. Their brains physically change because of what they did every day. Your brain can do the same thing with English. Every time you speak, even badly, even nervously, even with an accent thicker than peanut butter, you are physically changing your brain. You are building a new highway. And the more you drive on it, the smoother it gets. But here's the trap. Most English learners wait until they feel ready. They wait until the fear goes away. They wait until the accent is perfect. And that waiting is exactly what keeps the fear highway alive. Because waiting is avoidance. And avoidance tells your brain, yes, that thing is still dangerous. That's why we're not doing it. So the fear stays, the highway stays. You stay stuck. The counterintuitive truth is this. You don't wait for the fear to disappear before you act. You act, and the fear disappears afterward. That's what happened with Sarah. I wasn't fearless at the wedding. I was terrified. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But I showed up anyway. I talked to her anyway. I let her squeeze my hand anyway. And after, only after, did the fear shrink. The same applies to your English. Don't wait until you're confident to speak. Speak, and confidence will follow. Don't wait until you sound American. Sound like yourself, and the improvement will come. Action first, feeling second. That's the order. I know this sounds backwards. Our emotions tell us the opposite. I'll speak when I'm ready, we say. But ready is not a place you arrive. Ready is a decision you make. I decided to be ready for Sarah. Not because I felt ready, but because I was tired of being afraid. And that decision, that tiny, terrifying, irrational decision, changed my brain. Let me give you one more scientific tidbit, because I find this genuinely amazing. Your brain produces a chemical called cortisol when you're stressed. Cortisol is the fear chemical. It makes your heart race, your palms sweat, your thoughts scatter. But here's the kicker. Cortisol has a half-life of about 90 minutes. That means if you experience something scary and nothing bad happens, your cortisol levels naturally drop back to normal within an hour and a half. So the physical fear you feel when you speak English, it cannot last forever. Your body literally cannot sustain it. If you just ride the wave, if you let yourself be scared for 90 minutes without running away, your brain learns that the situation isn't actually dangerous. The fear fades on its own. You don't have to fight it. You just have to outlast it. That's what I did at the wedding. I didn't fight my jealousy. I didn't try to be calm. I just stood there, shaking, talking to Sarah, and waited for the 90 minutes to pass. And they did. And when they passed, I was still standing, still married, still okay. And Sarah was just a person. Not a monster. Not a threat, just a person. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you feel that spike of fear before speaking English, the tight chest, the dry mouth, the urge to disappear, don't run. Don't hide. Don't wait until you're ready. Just take a breath and say one word. Just one. Hello. Coffee. Sorry. One word won't kill you. One word won't make them laugh. One word is the first brick on a new highway. And after you say that word, wait. Feel the fear. Let it sit there and notice that nothing bad happens. The world doesn't end. The person doesn't attack you. You're still breathing. That's exposure. That's neuroplasticity. That's how you rewire a brain that has spent years telling you that English is dangerous. Sarah and I don't talk every day. We text maybe once a month. She sends me memes about bad knitting. I send her pictures of our dog, and every time my phone buzzes and I see her name, I feel a little ping of something. Not fear. Not jealousy. Just normal. Because my brain built a new highway, and the old one, it's still there. Somewhere. Buried under years of new experiences. But I never drive on it anymore, and neither do you have to drive on your fear highway. One word at a time. You can build a road to fluency. It won't be easy. It won't be fast, but it will be real. And real is so much better than perfect. So what happened next with Sarah? Did we actually become friends? Or was the wedding the peak of our relationship? And how did my Vietnamese mother react when she found out I was texting the ex-girlfriend? The answer involves a lot of fish sauce and one very awkward family dinner. Stay with me. We became friendly. You might think that after the wedding, after the hand squeeze and the texts and the gradual fading of my fear, Sarah and I became best friends. We did not. We became something quieter. Something that surprised me even more than friendship. We became friendly. And if you've never lived in a culture where friendly is different from friend, let me explain. In Vietnam, you're either family or you're a stranger. There's very little in between. If I invite you to my house, we are bonded. If I cook for you, we are practically sisters. But in America, people have layers. There are acquaintances, co-workers, neighbors, gym buddies, people you wave at but don't know their last names. And friendly lives in that spacious, comfortable middle zone. It means you like someone. You enjoy their company, but you don't need to know their childhood traumas or help them move a couch. At first, I didn't understand this. When Sarah texted me a meme, I thought, does she want to be my bridesmaid? When she commented on my Instagram photo, I thought, is she trying to steal my life? I was still translating American behavior through Vietnamese emotional grammar, and everything came out wrong. But slowly, over the months following the wedding, I started to get it. Sarah and I weren't becoming family. We were becoming pleasant. And that was enough. The turning point came about 6 months after the wedding. David had a work trip, and I was home alone, bored, scrolling through my phone, when I saw that Sarah had posted a photo of her latest knitting project. It was, objectively, a disaster. A lumpy, misshapen thing that was supposed to be a blanket but looked more like a melted map of Florida. Without thinking, I commented, "That's almost as bad as David's blender." She replied within seconds. You remembered the blender. And then, privately, she messaged me. Hey, I'm in Austin next weekend for a conference. Want to grab coffee? No pressure, just if you're free. My heart did a little jump. Not fear this time, something else. Something that felt like curiosity, maybe even warmth. I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes. My Vietnamese brain said, this is a trap. She wants to interrogate you about David. My new, slightly Americanized brain said, she just wants coffee. It's not that deep. I said yes. We met at a small cafe near the university, a kind of place with mismatched chairs and music so quiet you could hear yourself think. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, wearing a faded hoodie and no makeup. She looked tired, human, not like a threat at all. I ordered a latte. She ordered black coffee. No sugar, which I immediately judged as a psychopath move. And then we sat there, two women who had once loved the same man, and we talked. Not about David. That was the rule we didn't say out loud but both understood. We talked about work, about her struggles with the medical residency application process, about my frustration with American grocery stores that put bread next to cleaning supplies, about her mother, who was also Vietnamese. I had not known that, and who also thought Americans were crazy for staying friends with exes. My mum still doesn't know I came to your wedding, Sarah admitted, stirring her coffee with a tiny spoon. She would have had a heart attack. I laughed. My mum almost had a heart attack just hearing about it. She called me 3 times a day for a week. Sarah grinned. So we're both disappointments to our Vietnamese mothers. Nice to have company. And just like that, we weren't ex-girlfriend and new wife anymore. We were 2 women with complicated families, bad coffee orders, and a shared understanding of what it means to navigate 2 cultures at once. The conversation lasted 2 hours. 2 hours. I had never spent hours with a stranger, let alone a stranger who used to date my husband. When we finally stood up to leave, Sarah hugged me. A real hug. Not the side hug from the wedding. And she said, you know, I was really scared to meet you. I thought you'd be jealous and weird. I was jealous and weird, I said. I just hid it well. She laughed. Well, you hid it beautifully. And for the record, David has never been happier. You're good for him. I walked back to my car feeling light, disoriented, like I had just finished a workout I didn't know I needed. That was the first coffee. There was a second, a few months later, when Sarah came through Austin again. Then a third, when I was in Dallas for a work thing and she drove an hour to meet me. We never planned to become friends. It just happened. The way plants grow in a garden you forgot you planted. But here's what I want you to understand, because this connects directly to your English learning. Becoming friendly with Sarah required me to do something very difficult. It required me to stop seeing her as a character in my story and start seeing her as the main character in her own. In my jealous imagination, Sarah existed only in relation to me. She was David's ex. She was the threat. She was the woman who might take my place. She had no life of her own. No struggles. No bad knitting projects. No Vietnamese mother who embarrassed her. She was just a plot device in my drama. But the moment I sat across from her at that cafe and heard her talk about her own fears, her own family, her own failed attempts at making a blanket, she stopped being a symbol and started being a person, and persons are much harder to hate. This is exactly what happens when you try to learn English and you're terrified of native speakers. You turn them into symbols. You imagine them as judges, critics, grammar police who are just waiting for you to mess up. You forget that they have their own insecurities, their own bad days, their own moments of sounding stupid in front of other people. The barista who might laugh at your accent, she's worried about her rent. The co-worker who seems impatient, he's fighting with his spouse. The stranger on the street who didn't understand your question, She's late for a doctor's appointment. Everyone is the main character of their own stress. And once you realize that, the fear starts to dissolve, not all at once, but slowly, coffee by coffee, word by word. I want to tell you about one more coffee with Sarah, because this one matters. It was about a year after the wedding. I was pregnant. David and I had just found out. And I hadn't told anyone except my mother that I was so nervous, so full of hormones and anxiety, that I blurted it out to Sarah within 5 minutes of sitting down. "I'm pregnant," I said, then immediately covered my mouth. Oh my God, I wasn't supposed to tell anyone. Sarah didn't look jealous. She didn't look sad. She looked genuinely, utterly thrilled. "That's amazing," she said, grabbing my hands across the table. "You're going to be such a good mom." And then she started crying. Not fake tears. Real, messy, happy tears. That was the moment I finally, completely, without any leftover shadow of doubt, understood. Sarah had never wanted my life. She had wanted her own. And now she had it. A career she loved. A partner who adored her. A future that had nothing to do with David except the warm, distant fondness you feel for a chapter you've closed. We became friendly not because we ignored the past, but because we both accepted that the past was over. And that acceptance, that quiet, ordinary, and glamorous acceptance, was the most American thing I had ever learned. In my culture, we hold on. We keep photos of our ancestors on the altar. We remember slides from 20 years ago. We carry our history like a backpack full of bricks. But Americans, they're experts at putting things down. Not forgetting, just releasing. Letting the weight go so they can walk faster. I'm not saying one way is better. I'm saying that living between two cultures taught me to choose. Some things I carry. Some things I set down. And Sarah, I set her down in the category of friendly. Not best friend, not enemy, not threat, just a person I like, who I see a few times a year, who makes terrible blankets and drinks black coffee and cried happy tears when I told her I was going to be a mom. That's enough. That's more than enough. So what happened after the baby was born? Did Sarah become Aunt Sarah to my child? And how did my Vietnamese mother react to that? The answer involves a lot of fish sauce, one very awkward family dinner, and a moment of grace I will never forget. Stick with me. The best is yet to come. The real test. Our children. The baby arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks early, with a scream so loud that the nurse laughed and said, "She's got lungs." We named her Mai, after my grandmother, and for the first few weeks, life was a blur of diapers and sleeplessness and the strange, overwhelming love that makes you cry at commercials. I was exhausted. I was happy. I was also, if I'm being honest, a little bit terrified, not of the baby, of something else. Something I hadn't expected to think about in those hazy early days of motherhood. I was terrified of what Sarah would mean to my daughter. Because here's the thing about children. They don't understand boundaries. They don't understand friendly versus friend versus ex-girlfriend who is now kind of a coffee buddy. They just see people. And they ask questions. Brutal, honest, unfiltered questions that make you realize how complicated your life has become. The first time Sarah met my daughter was about 4 months old. Sarah had driven down from Dallas for a conference and texted me, "I know you're busy with the baby, but I have a gift. Can I drop it by?" I said yes, partly because I wanted to see her, and partly because I was desperate for adult conversation that didn't involve diaper rash cream. She arrived with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a tiny hand-knit blanket. And this one wasn't lumpy. This one was actually beautiful, soft blue yarn, careful stitches, little stars embroidered in the corners. "I practiced," Sarah said, looking almost shy. "It took me like 15 tries. I wanted it to be perfect for her. I stared at the blanket, then at Sarah, then at Mai, who was drooling on my shoulder and completely unaware that she was receiving a gift from her father's ex-girlfriend. My Vietnamese brain whispered, "This is weird. This is too close. This is not how families work." That my American brain, the one I had been building over years of coffee dates and boundary conversations, whispered something else. "This is kindness. Just kindness. Accept it." I accepted it. I wrapped Mai in the blanket, and Sarah took a photo of us with her phone, which she later texted to me with the caption, "To beautiful girls." That was the beginning of something I hadn't anticipated. Sarah became a small but real presence in my daughter's life. Not a grandmother, not an aunt. Something else. Something the English language doesn't have a perfect word for. She sent birthday gifts. She asked for photos. She came to Mai's first birthday party, an event so chaotic that David's uncle spilled red wine on the carpet and my mother cried because the cake wasn't the right color. Sarah showed up with a book about a bunny, ate a hot dog, and left after an hour. Normal, easy, unremarkable. But here's what made it remarkable to me. My mother was at that party, and my mother knew. She knew who Sarah was, David's ex, the woman I had been terrified of, the woman whose name had caused a 3-month spiral of sleepless nights. And my mother watched Sarah play peekaboo with Mai, watched her laugh at something David said, watched her hug me goodbye. Then my mother pulled me into the kitchen, her eyes narrowed, and said in Vietnamese, "Is she the one?" "Yes, Andy." I said, "That's Sarah." My mother was quiet for a long time. I could see the war happening inside her, the old rules fighting with the new reality. Her daughter, happy, her granddaughter, laughing, and this woman. This interloper. This ghost from the past. Holding the baby like she had every right to be there. Finally, my mother said something I will never forget. "She makes Mai laugh. That is good." That was it. No lecture. No judgment. No lecture about honor or propriety or the sacredness of marriage. Just, "She makes Mai laugh. That is good." In that moment, I realized that my mother, the same woman who had called me crazy for inviting Sarah to the wedding, had just made a choice. She had chosen her granddaughter's happiness over her own cultural rules. She had chosen love over fear. And if she could do that, after 50 years of living in a world where exes were enemies, maybe I could do anything. The real test, I've come to understand, isn't whether you can be friends with an ex. The real test is whether you can let that person be part of your child's world. Because children change everything. They make your past matter in new ways. They force you to answer questions you've been avoiding. When Mai is older, she will ask, "Who is Sarah?" And I will have to tell her the truth. Not the jealous, dramatic, fearful version. The real version. Sarah is someone Daddy used to love, and then he loved me. And now we are all friendly. Because life is long and people grow, and love doesn't have to disappear just because it changes shape. That's a hard thing to explain to a child. But it's also a beautiful thing. Because it teaches them something important. It teaches them that people are not disposable, that relationships can transform, that the end of one thing can be the beginning of something else. Not romantic, not intense, just human. I think about this a lot when I think about English learning. Because so many of you are afraid of making mistakes. You're afraid of sounding stupid. You're afraid that if you say something wrong, the native speaker will reject you forever. But here's the truth. Native speakers don't reject you for bad grammar. They reject you for bad intentions. And your intentions, to learn, to connect, to try, are good. So good. The same way Sarah's intentions were good when she knitted that blanket for my daughter. She wasn't trying to steal my family. She was trying to give something, a gift, a gesture. A tiny, imperfect, hand-knit piece of proof that she wished us well. That's what language learning is. When you strip away the fear, It's a gift. You are giving the other person your effort, your vulnerability, your willingness to sound silly so you can say something real. And most people, the good people, will receive that gift with grace. Not everyone. Some people are rude. Some people are impatient. Some people will correct you when you didn't ask to be corrected. But those people exist in every language, every culture, every family. They are not the majority. They are just loud. The majority, the Sarahs of the world, will see you trying, and they will meet you halfway. They will slow down. They will rephrase. They will smile and nod and help you find the word you're looking for. Because most humans, regardless of language, want the same thing. They want to connect, and connection doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. Mai is 3 years old now. She knows Sarah as Mommy's friend who makes blankets. She doesn't know about the wedding, the jealousy, the sleepless nights. She doesn't need to. Not yet, maybe someday. But right now, all she knows is that Sarah is a person who brings her books and hugs her hello and laughs at her knock-knock jokes. Even the ones that don't make sense. And David. He and Sarah text maybe 4 times a year. Birthday messages, holiday wishes, a photo of Mai in the blanket, captioned, "She still sleeps with this every night." And Sarah replies, "That's the best compliment I've ever received." That's it. That's the whole story. No drama. No hidden tension. Just 2 people who used to date, who now share a quiet, distant, uncomplicated friendship that exists mostly in the margins of their lives. My mother has met Sarah 3 times now. The last time, she said to me in Vietnamese, "She seems nice for an ex." That's my mother's version of a standing ovation. So the real test, the one with children, the one with family, the one with all the messy history, we passed, not because we tried hard, but because we stopped trying so hard. We stopped forcing a friendship. We stopped fearing an enemy. We just lived. And living, it turns out, is the best boundary of all. When you're busy raising a child, building a career, paying bills, and trying to get enough sleep, there's not much energy left for jealousy. The ex-girlfriend becomes just another person in the background. A familiar face, a nice memory, a hand-knit blanket. That's what I want for you with English. I want the language to stop being a source of fear and start being a source of ordinary, everyday connection. I want you to stop catastrophizing about native speakers and start seeing them as potential Sarahs. People who might make you laugh. People who might bring you gifts. People who might cry happy tears when you share good news. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. And if you show up enough times, eventually, the fear fades. The language becomes background, and you realize that you've been speaking it all along. Not perfectly, but really. What happened next? Did Sarah stay in our lives? And how did this whole journey finally make me feel fluent in English? Not in a classroom, but in the messy, beautiful, real world. Stick with me for the final section. I've saved the most important lesson for last. English flowed naturally. Here's the part of the story I almost didn't tell you, because it sounds like a lie. It sounds like the kind of inspirational quote people post on Instagram with a picture of a sunset. But it happened, and it changed everything. Somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, the wedding, the jealousy, the coffee dates, the baby blankets, my English started to flow. Not because I studied harder, not because I memorized more vocabulary, not because I finally learned the difference between affect and affect I still don't know. And at this point, I'm too afraid to ask. My English flowed because I stopped treating it like a test and started treating it like a life. Let me explain what I mean. For years, every time I opened my mouth to speak English, I heard a voice in my head. Not my voice, my mother's voice, my teacher's voices, the voice of every person who had ever corrected me, every textbook that had circled my mistakes in red pen. That voice said, Be careful. Don't embarrass yourself. Say it perfectly or don't say it at all. So I didn't say it at all. I stayed quiet in meetings. I let David order for me at restaurants. I laughed at jokes I didn't understand instead of asking for clarification. I was safe. I was also invisible. But then Sarah happened. And Sarah forced me to speak. Not because she demanded it, because she created a space where I wanted to speak. When we sat across from each other at that cafe, drinking our terrible coffee, I found myself saying things I had never said in English before. Not because my grammar was suddenly perfect. It wasn't. I still mixed up he and she. I still forgot the past tense of irregular verbs. But Sarah didn't care. She listened to my stumbles like they were music. She waited while I searched for words. She never finished my sentences or corrected my pronunciation. She just let me be. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how powerful that is? A person who lets you be bad at something without making you feel bad about being bad. That is not kindness. That is medicine. There is actual science behind this. Psychologists call it a low anxiety environment. And it is the single most important factor in language acquisition. Not grammar drills, not flashcard apps, not even immersion if immersion comes with judgment. A low anxiety environment. A place where you feel safe enough to be wrong. A place where mistakes are not failures but data. A place where the person listening to you is more interested in what you're saying than in how you're saying it. For me, that place was not a classroom. It was not a language exchange app. It was a cafe in Austin, Texas. Sitting across from my husband's ex-girlfriend. The same woman I had feared would steal my life. Instead, she gave me my voice. I want to tell you about one specific moment. We were talking about our mothers, about the pressure to be perfect, about the way immigrant parents pass down their anxieties like heirlooms. I was trying to explain something complicated. A feeling I had carried since childhood, the sense that I was never quite enough, never quite American enough, never quite Vietnamese enough. Always stuck in the middle. The words weren't coming. I knew the vocabulary. I knew the grammar. But the emotion was too big for the language. I stopped. I felt the familiar heat in my face. The familiar urge to give up and change the subject. But Sarah didn't let me. She leaned forward and said, "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." So I took my time. I sat in the discomfort. I let the words crawl out of my mouth like turtles leaving a warm pond. I feel between, not here, not there, just between. That was not a beautiful sentence. It was not grammatically complex, but it was true, and Sarah understood it. She nodded and said, "I know that feeling. My mum is Vietnamese. My dad is white. I grew up between two. And just like that, we weren't ex and new wife. We were to between people, speaking a language that belonged to neither of our cultures, finding each other in the gaps." That conversation lasted 3 hours. 3 hours. I had never spoken English for 3 hours in my life. Not even during the TOEFL. And I wasn't exhausted afterward. I was energized. Because for the first time, I wasn't performing English. I was living it. The difference between performing and living is everything. When you perform, you're outside the language, looking in, checking every word against an imaginary rubric. When you live, you're inside the language. You're not thinking about the rules. You're thinking about the person across from you. You're thinking about the story you want to tell. The words become transparent, like a window you forget is there because you're so focused on the view. That's what fluency actually is. Not perfection, transparency. The ability to forget you're speaking a second language because you're too busy being human. I started to notice changes everywhere. At work, I stopped typing out emails in my head before writing them. I just wrote. The mistakes were still there. But I stopped obsessing over them. I stopped apologizing for my accent in meetings. I just talked and people listened, not because my English was flawless, but because I finally had something to say. The stories I had lived, the wedding, the jealousy, the unlikely friendship with Sarah, had given me a voice, not a perfect voice, a real voice, a voice that stumbled and laughed and corrected itself and moved on. David noticed first. "You're different," he said one night, while we were doing dishes. "You used to get so quiet around my friends. Now you argue with them." He said it like a compliment. I took it as one. My mother noticed too, though she expressed it in her own way. "Your English doesn't hurt my ears anymore," she said. Which, from her, was practically poetry. But the person who noticed most was me. I caught myself thinking in English. Not translating from Vietnamese, but actually dreaming, planning, worrying in English. One night, I woke up from a dream where I was arguing with a cashier about a coupon. A boring, ordinary, completely English dream. And I cried a little, not from sadness, from relief. Because I had been trying so hard for so long. And here it was, happening without my permission. The language had stopped being my enemy and had become my home. Here's what I want you to take from this, because it's the most important thing I learned. You cannot think your way into fluency. You cannot study your way into fluency. You cannot wait until you feel ready, because you will never feel ready. Fluency happens when you stop trying to be fluent and start trying to connect. Find your Sarah. Find someone who will sit across from you, drink bad coffee, and let you be bad at English without making you feel bad about it. That person exists. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a stranger on a language exchange app who is just as scared as you are. Find them, and then talk, not about grammar, about your life, about your fears, about the time you were jealous of your husband's ex-girlfriend and then she became your friend. Tell your story. Not perfectly, really, because your story is interesting. Your story is unique. Your story is the only thing you have that no one else can offer. And when you tell it, when you stop worrying about the mistakes and start caring about the connection, something magical happens. The words come, not all of them, not always the right ones, but enough. Enough to be seen, enough to be heard, enough to be human. Sarah and I still text. She sent me a photo last week of a new blanket she's knitting. It's purple and lumpy and absolutely hideous. I texted back, "That's worse than the blender." She replied, "You're welcome," and I laughed out loud in English at a joke from my husband's ex-girlfriend. If you had told me 3 years ago that this would be my life, I would have said you were crazy. But here I am, speaking English, living English, not perfectly, but really. And really is so much better. So what's the final lesson? What did all of this? The wedding, the fear, the friendship, the baby, the lumpy blankets. Teach me about learning English. I've saved the best for last. One more section, one more story, and then I'll let you go. The unexpected gift. So here we are at the end of the story. And I need to tell you something that might sound strange. The unexpected gift of all of this. The wedding, the jealousy, the coffee dates, the lumpy blankets, was not a friendship with Sarah. It was not a stronger marriage. It was not even fluency in English, although that came too. The unexpected gift was this. I stopped being afraid of being afraid. Let me explain. For most of my life, I believed that fear was a sign that I was on the wrong path. If I felt scared before speaking English, that meant I wasn't ready. If I felt jealous of Sarah, that meant our marriage was in trouble. If I felt anxious about fitting into American culture, that meant I didn't belong here. I treated fear like a stop sign, a signal to turn back, but that's not what fear is. Fear is not a stop sign. Fear is a speed bump. It's uncomfortable. It slows you down, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't keep driving. The most important thing I learned from Sarah, from the whole messy, beautiful, terrifying experience, is that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and doing the thing anyway. You already know this. In your bones. Think about the first time you rode a bike. You were scared, you fell, you cry, but you got back on. Not because the fear disappeared, but because the desire to ride was stronger than the fear of falling. Learning English is exactly the same. Every time you open your mouth, you might fall. You might say the wrong word. You might be misunderstood. You might feel that hot flush of embarrassment. But here's the secret that no textbook will tell you. Falling is not failure. Falling is data. Every mistake is a piece of information your brain uses to build a better map. The only real failure is staying silent, staying safe, staying invisible. I think about my daughter. She is 3 years old, and she is learning to speak both English and Vietnamese. She mixes them up constantly. She says things like, "Mummy, I want NCC water," and "Daddy, look at the con meerkat." She doesn't apologize for it. She doesn't freeze up. She just keeps talking, because she has something to say, and the words, any words in any language, are just tools. That's the mindset I want you to steal. The mindset of a 3-year-old who doesn't know she's supposed to be embarrassed, who doesn't know the accents are bad, or that grammar mistakes are shameful. She just knows that she wants a cookie. And she will use every word she has, in every language she knows, to get that cookie. And you know what? She usually gets the cookie because the person listening isn't grading her. They're just trying to understand. The same is true for you. The native speaker you're afraid of isn't holding a red pen. They're not keeping score. They're just trying to figure out if you want coffee or tea. And if you say "I want tea" with a terrible accent or wrong word order or a missing article, they will still bring you tea, because humans are wired for meaning, not perfection. We are meaning-making machines. We can understand broken English. We can understand hand gestures. We can understand one-word sentences. What we cannot understand is silence. So here is my final, most important piece of advice. Stop practicing English. Start using English. Not when you're ready. Not when you're perfect. Now. Today. Right now. Use it badly. Use it messily. Use it like a 3-year-old who wants a cookie. Because the only way to build that new highway in your brain, the one I talked about in section 8, is to drive on it. Even when it's bumpy. Even when you get lost. Even when you have to stop and ask for directions. Every single time you speak, you are laying down new pavement. Every mistake is a lesson. Every awkward conversation is a gift. And one day, sooner than you think, you will wake up and realize that you're not translating in your head anymore. You're not rehearsing sentences. You're just talking, thinking, dreaming, living in English. Not perfectly, but really, and really is so much better than perfect. I want to leave you with one last image. Last week, Sarah came to visit. She brought another blanket. This one for my 3rd birthday. It was still lumpy, still hideous, still made with so much love that I almost cried when I opened it. Mai grabbed the blanket, wrapped it around her shoulders like a cape and yelled, "Thank you, Aunt Sarah." Then she ran around the living room, pretending to be a superhero. While Sarah and I sat on the couch and laughed. David walked in from work, saw the scene and said, "This is weird, right?" And Sarah said, "Yeah." And I said, "Totally weird." And then we all laughed together. That's the life I have now. Not the life I imagined. Not the life my mother planned for me. A weird, messy, cross-cultural ex-girlfriend included, lumpy blanket life. And I wouldn't trade it for anything, because that weirdness is where I found my voice. And you will find yours too. Not in the perfect sentence, Not in the accent that passes for native, but in the moments when you stop being afraid of being afraid. When you open your mouth, stumble, correct yourself, and keep going. When you let the ex come to the wedding. When you text her back. When you drink coffee and talk about your mothers and cry a little and laugh a lot. That is fluency. That is freedom. That is the unexpected gift. Thank you for listening to my story. I told it to you slowly, on purpose, because I know what it's like to need time, to need space, to need someone who won't rush you. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are just between. And between is exactly where you need to be to learn something new. So keep going, keep speaking, keep making mistakes, keep building the highway. And the next time you feel that spike of fear, before a conversation, a presentation, a simple greeting, remember Sarah's hand squeeze. Remember the lumpy blanket. Remember that I was terrified too. And I did it anyway. You can too. So that was my story. The wedding, the fear, the ex-girlfriend who became a friend, the lumpy blankets, and the strange, beautiful truth that I learned English not in a classroom, but in the middle of my own messy, unpredictable life. But here's the thing. This is not the end of my story. And it's not the end of yours either. Because next week, I'm going to tell you a new story. A story about something that happened last month. Something I haven't shared with anyone yet. Something that made me realize that the journey of learning English and learning to be human never really ends. It just gets more interesting. You won't believe what Sarah did this time. And you won't believe what my mother said when she found out. So here's what I need you to do. Hit that subscribe button right now. Not later, not tomorrow, now. Because YouTube's algorithm in 2026 loves viewers who engage early. And I want to make sure you don't miss the next episode. Click the bell too, the one that says all notifications. Because trust me, you're going to want to hear what happened next. While you're down there, leave me a comment. Tell me one fear you have about speaking English, just one. I read every comment, and I might just answer yours in the next video. If this story touched you, if it made you feel less alone, share it with one person who needs to hear it. One friend who is also learning English. One partner who doesn't understand why you're so scared. One stranger in a Facebook group who thinks they'll never be fluent. Be there, Sarah. Be the person who says, "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being brave enough to learn a language that doesn't belong to you and making it your own. I'll see you in the next video. Same channel, same messy, beautiful, real stories. And remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. Subscribe now. I'll be waiting.